I think we can get started. So thanks everyone for joining. My name is Vijay. I'm a senior vice president here at Environics Research and lead the health and wellness division. And I'm joined by my colleague Susan, who is another SVP at Environics and leads our market strategy group. And so Susan and I have been talking a lot about, how we can bring that social values to kind of the masses. And I think values are really what brought Susan and I to Environics. It was the thing that I found super interesting. I find, human psychology and those types of topics really interesting. And we wanted to put together this webinar series because we find that when we talk to clients kind of out loud during pitches and, when thinking about strategy and we talk about values and the importance of them and how they can use them, people really start to kind of see the possibilities for the application a bit more clearly. And I think that's because values, when we think about them, can feel very abstract and very kind of hard to put our arms around or kind of action upon. And that's often because our values are unconscious, right? We're not waking up in the morning and thinking, what values am I going to be expressing today? They're really kind of core to who we are and how we kind of operate in the world. And I think Environics has been studying values for over 50 years now. We have a long history of studying values in Canada and the US, and really kind of our ability to see trends over time allow us to kind of explain what's happening, but also think kind of in the future where values trends are heading and really talking about how we use that. And so we're hoping for your questions today. We're looking forward to kind of hearing what you think, but maybe Susan, if we can start with just how do you talk about values? And when people ask you, I know people ask me, like, what do you do for work? And I try and explain values. I have a different way of explaining it. So how do you talk about values?
Yeah, so it's actually really interesting, Vijay, because when you talk about the fact that we talk to clients or we talk to prospective clients and we explain values, that's when they kind of really get it. We both came to Environics really enthusiastic and excited about values, but I find that in times that we've been talking about values together, we have a different way of explaining it. So there's a lot of overlap too, right? Because obviously values are a certain way, but we each kind of have a complementary way to talk about it that I think helps people really understand what values are all about. And personally, I find values easier to explain when you use an analogy. So typically, we use an onion slide. We've also used other things like avocados or eggs or anything with a layer, really, because it really is about peeling back those layers, right, and getting at your core. And so if you think about the things that on the external, the surface face, the face of someone, what you can observe demographically, what they look like, how they behave, their actions, and you start peeling back those layers, then you get at, some of their attitudes and things like that. Their values are really fundamentally what's at that core of them that really drives, the way that they see the world. It's the fundamental worldview and perspective. It shapes the way that they engage with others, how they see the world, how they take on opportunities and challenges, and they're formed early on in life. They don't change much. Once they're kind of set in your mid-teens, they are influenced by your upbringing, your schooling, your community, your culture, but they don't shift dramatically once they're set. They're really enduring, and they're not trendy or fads, despite the fact that we measure trends. But as a person, values are enduring.
Yeah, and I think the analogy of the onion is really interesting because I like to think about when you peel back at those layers, that's really the asking of the question why. So why is someone doing that, right? And the further we kind of get to that core, the more we're able to see the person as a human being and as a person versus what they're doing and defining them by kind of the demographics or the behaviors that they kind of they exhibit. And so we're no longer looking at people only in kind of specific context, but we're thinking about them in their overall life experience. And I think that's especially important in a world where we are often surrounded by people who have similar values to us. And that's especially prevalent right now with social media and our kind of silos that we live in. It's hard for us to kind of sometimes remove our own bias in terms of we think that people think this way because everyone else around us thinks this way. But also it's especially important because it really helps us to kind of nuance the conversation. And I think an example that I often use is millennials. We talk about millennials, and there's plenty of articles that say millennials do this, millennials do that, and they talk about millennials as this big, broad group. But what we understand about millennials from our segmentation of millennials is that there's actually 6 unique segments of millennials, and their values actually drive kind of the way that they exist in the world, and the generalization or the kind of stereotypes that come along, they're not helpful to actually understanding what's driving individuals. And I think, people think millennials, everyone's enthusiastic for technology. We know that that's not true. That they're all progressive, that they don't necessarily have, traditional values. We also know that that's not true. And so it's important for us to kind of understand that, like, by nuancing the conversation and understanding things through a values lens, we're really able to kind of better connect and engage with people in a more kind of authentic way. When you think about values, what do you think is really important for them to understand about values and kind of how they're formed and kind of generally like how people might use them in a business context?
So I think values are particularly powerful because it helps anyone who understands them. It humanizes someone, right? It really it brings someone to life. It adds color, it adds nuance, it adds flavor. So you can understand groups of people or an individual by, maybe they like to, drive convertibles, and they like to go on cruises, and they like to live in the suburbs, and maybe they're middle life suburban family, and you can start forming an idea or impression of them already. But you can have groups of people or individuals who look exactly like that, behave exactly that way. They could have completely different values profiles, right? We measure more than 100 values, so there's a really, really rich context that you can really understand them through. And when you understand that, someone who looks and acts very similarly, likes very similar things, actually has fundamentally different values, it really helps you understand them at a very deep and human level, so that way you can connect, or organizations or our clients can connect to them in a way that really, really matters to them, because the values are really what informs their behaviors, their decisions, and how they're going to engage with brands, products, services, and everything else.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we hear a lot from our clients is that they have a behavioral segmentation or they have an attitudinal segmentation, and so the idea of adding another segmentation on top, or changing out that segmentation, seems a bit daunting. And I think one of the things that we find with clients is that when we start to explain the actual complementary nature of a values-based segmentation on top of a behavioral segmentation, what we see is that it's actually a really nice layer, because it's not that the behavioral or the attitudinal isn't a value, it's a great value, and it really helps us to understand certain aspects of an individual, particularly in the context of whatever industry or product area or whatever. But what the values allows us to do is really answer that question of why. So why are they buying that product? Why are they going to your competitor? Why is it that they're more likely to go with product A versus product B? And values really provides that kind of rich and nuanced context that allows us to kind of see where some of those differences are actually being driven from, and what opportunities do you have as an organization or a business to kind of capitalize on that and actually kind of gain some market share from folks that you maybe not currently getting much from, but like through kind of small tweaks or through kind of a more kind of targeted campaign, through an understanding of values, you can really connect and engage with those individuals.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you brought that up, actually, because it made me think of something. So when you were talking about the fact that sometimes values is hard for people to, get their arms around or wrap their heads around, it is the case, because when we talk about values, I mean, we do a lot of segmentations. Values can be used in many, many different ways. So we conduct our generational segmentations. We've done segmentations on a global level. We also do very custom segmentations that are specific to, an industry sector, a category, or whatever our clients' target audience interest is. So the ability for us to be able to layer in segmentations that we conduct with existing ones is one way to approach it. But that's not all we do, right? I think people think about values and they hear it and they're like, wow, this is this huge thing. It's very daunting. And how am I actually going to be able to use it? You can actually use it quite easily by just like plugging in a few values and some research or we've been working with values for so long. I think I always say this, I can't help but see everything I do, like, paint it through the lens of value. So even in work that doesn't involve values necessarily that I'm working, I'm sure it's this way for you too, that I'm doing with clients, or if I'm seeing something, just in my everyday life, I'm like, it's reflecting these values. It's these are the kinds of values I'm seeing kind of being brought to life. And so I think, even in very simple ways, values can still be utilized to even make minor tweaks to marketing campaigns, messaging, and things like that aren't too intensive. They really allow you to make use of values to connect to people in a way that's much more meaningful.
Yeah, and I like the kind of the comment that you made in terms of like we look at everything through values, and I would say beyond work, I actually find that I use it in my day-to-day interactions with people, and it's a way of like understanding where people are coming from and actually building empathy with an individual. And I think values has been a tool that's really helped me kind of propel me to kind of better understand and ask the right questions to kind of dig at what those values are. And I think the focus groups that we do is great training for that, because you start to listen for different types of things as well when you're hearing from folks. Can you maybe talk about some of the ways that you've used social values with clients and like how they've applied it to their business? What, maybe some specific industry examples that you have?
Yeah, so I mean, we've used it in all types of industries. So consumer packaged goods, technology, arts and culture, tourism. So we'd asked everyone to post their upcoming summer trip if you have something to look forward to. I'd certainly like to kind of spend time thinking about mine. But the part of the reason we want to do that, not just to also help you kind of start having something to look forward to and share, but it's when you think about the types of trips that you have, that you've got planned, it helps you really understand, that values actually has a big influence in terms of the types of trips or your travel orientations, right? So, I mean, I personally, I've had my friends say, okay, I'm going to go to this all-inclusive resort. Join me next week. And I'm more like, oh, okay, maybe not. I'm going to allocate my trip time to something else. Whereas I might be, okay, well, I'm going to go, backpacking, and I'm going to be jumping on this bus crowded, in this public urban center. It's me driving me off into who knows where, but I'm excited to see where I'm going. Why don't you join me? And they're like, oh, no, thanks. You have your fun. Yeah. So a lot of that's really, it's really shaped by values. And so I think if you think about where your trip is, I'm sure some.
So it looks like we have Vancouver Island, Hamilton, camping. Saskatoon, so lots of outdoorsy folks, I think.
Yeah.
That attraction to nature is a value that we measure, and so probably very high amongst those folks. But we have an interesting graphic that we sometimes use to talk about values and what the difference is. And there's a picture of someone on a cruise and someone camping, and it's kind of like on top of it says like hell, or what is it? It's like
we have many versions.
Yeah,
so it's hard to
but essentially it gets at that idea that like values are driving things that you don't even necessarily think of. You're not thinking about your values in the context of how are my values shaping my vacation plans, but they really do shape the way that you travel, where you travel, what types of attractions you want to kind of go to, whether you want to do the touristy types of things or whether you want to just get lost in the city, kind of like you said.
Yeah, so that's exactly. I mean, we've done work in the tourism space where we helped work up, travel segmentations, and you can clearly see very distinct, very clear differences between the types of travel attitudes and travel values and how they manifest in terms of the behaviors that people take on when they're planning for and engaging in the travel, and their ability to really immerse or kind of do something else.
Yeah, and maybe can you speak to the Amazon work that we did? Because I thought that was a really,
yeah. So that was more to support some really strong kind of brand values and thought leadership from a marketing perspective, but it was really to help understand and measure the different values of not just Canadians, but we conducted this study, in many different markets, and it was really to track and understand the values of different populations on issues of sustainability and EDI, as well as consumer values, and you can really see that a lot of the trends taking shape in terms of the things that were really mattering, and where people need to kind of keep a pulse on, or organizations need to kind of keep a pulse on, to really understand how to craft brand positioning or marketing or product and service offerings to really speak to and meet the needs of consumer groups or populations as they are taking shape and evolving.
And I think another kind of application of values, I work in the healthcare space, and so we do a lot of kind of work that looks at our patient connect segmentation, which is a values-based segmentation that focuses on health. And one of the applications that we found really interesting was during the COVID-19 pandemic. It was, an urgency to kind of get as many people vaccinated as possible. And we saw that there was a significant portion of the population that was not willing to get vaxxed or wasn't getting vaxxed. And we did a study to kind of understand, and through the patient connect segmentation, what we realized was that the media narrative of all people who didn't want to get vaxxed as, anti-science, essentially like kind of maligning them in the public. What we found was through our patient connect segmentation and the focus groups was that there was kind of multiple reasons that people weren't getting, and it wasn't just that they didn't trust the science. There was definitely a portion of that population that didn't or didn't believe in vaccinations or whatever, but there was a significant portion of those that were that were not getting vaccinated for different reasons, right? Like the idea that everyone kind of knows how to navigate the healthcare system is something that I think a lot of my healthcare clients run into, is that you work in healthcare, you understand kind of the healthcare, like the context of healthcare. And also, we have a segment within our patient connect segmentation that's called the responsible proactives. That's really only represented about 17-18% of the Canadian population. When I do that, our segmentation with clients, it ends up being like 60-70% of the room, it falls into that category. And the result of that is that there's a lot of kind of bias in thinking that can go into some of your strategic planning or into the way that you're trying to connect with individuals. And I think trust is something that we see a deficit of kind of in our culture right now. Trust in institutions is reducing. All of those kind of trust in, people are trying to build trust with brands and things like that. And I think understanding values is one way that we've been able to kind of demonstrate that through an understanding of values, you can really kind of build that trust.
Mm-hmm. I actually, what you mentioned I want to bring it back to a point about, making how values can be more accessible and understood, because again, we measure more than 100 values. It's continuously evolving. We're always adding and building up the list as the world is changing and evolving. And so we have the ability, because we've been doing this 5 decades, to track values over time. And I think one way that that helps people to understand values is when you see values that are more relatable to life, right? So like the actual reality that they're experiencing. So what we have seen lately, you kind of brought this up when you were taking a look at the trips that were being planned, the attraction to nature has been on the rise, right?
Yeah.
That was really impacted by the pandemic. But what also has been increasing is an aversion to complexity and some financial concern, as well as some tech anxiety. And when you relate to that to, the economic environment, what we've all kind of just gone through in terms of, the pandemic, but all the things that are, taking place around the world, and AI, it helps you then be able to connect it to the things that are happening around us in everyday life, and that helps you really understand and grasp the values that we measure more easily.
Mm-hmm. And I think another thing that we often talk about is kind of driving innovation within organizations, and people wanting to kind of drive innovation through kind of new ideas. And I think one of the ways that there's been a real emphasis, and for good reason, is kind of in the equity, diversity, and inclusion space. But one element of EDI that I think is often kind of missed is this idea of diversity of values, right? And ensuring that your teams are built from kind of a diversity or have kind of a diversity of values within your teams, because that diversity of values and that which is driven by kind of life experience can really bring new ideas to the table. And if you're only kind of surrounding yourself with folks who only have the same values as you really risk kind of new innovations and new opportunities.
Yeah. And what you're talking about is actually reflecting one of our values, which is social learning.
Mm-hmm.
And we were kind of chatting earlier before noon, the noon hour, and thinking about, well, should we share some of our favorite values? It's hard to pick, right? Top 3, top 5, top 7. And so you'd mentioned social learning as being one of yours.
Mm-hmm.
You stole one of mine.
Yeah.
So that's actually one of mine too, right? But social learning really is about being really interested in seeing value in the diversity of perspectives and experiences, and really wanting to put yourself in other people's shoes, because you find it very valuable to have be enriched by the diversity that's out there, and the understanding of the different perspectives. Mm-hmm. And so in addition to the point you're raising about it, it's actually really funny that you brought that up as being important, because it's a reflection of your own value, and it happens to be one of our values that we measure, but it's also mine too.
Yeah. Great. So I want to turn to kind of Q&A and see if there are any Q&A. So just give us a minute here. Oh, okay. I guess let's maybe just expand on the values that we thought that we because we were thinking about like what values are kind of most representative of who we are, and a bit about why and how that value was formed. So, adaptive navigation is something that I have as a core kind of value to who I am. And that's really, a result of where I was brought up, how I was brought up, being a queer kid in Halifax, Nova Scotia, like trying to find my way around and kind of adapt to different groups of people, different types of people. And I think that has served me really well, but it's really formed by that kind of experience kind of as a child. And similar, like flexible families, I grew up where I didn't actually have a lot of like my grandparents, cousins and things in Canada, but my parents made the community our kind of family. And that idea that family doesn't have to just be a mom, dad, and kids kind of thing, which is a more traditional view of family, but flexible families being that like, you can have kind of your chosen family community, all of that kind of thing. And so I think those other two values, in addition to kind of social learning, that I think are really help to kind of define who I am. Mm-hmm. How about you?
Well, social learning and adaptive navigation would be two of mine too, but I guess I'll add personal creativity would be one of mine as well, which is really about looking for opportunities to create and to express oneself, whether it's in work and play and those kinds of things. And I think it's so these values that we're talking about, and you kind of already elaborated on it, are values that are expressive of our own values.
Mhm.
But when I was talking about, picking top 5, top 3, sometimes it's, some of the values that are favorites from the list that we have aren't necessarily ones that I think are reflective of my own values, but they're fun ones that when you're actually playing around with the values, they're really interesting ones because they help paint really interesting stories and narratives about the individual or the groups of people that you're trying to understand.
Mm-hmm.
Another one of mine is rejection of order or rejection of authority, but we won't go down that.
Are there, would love to take any questions from kind of the audience if there are any, so please put them in the chat. But in the meantime, are there others? Okay, I see some coming through, just one second. I guess like when you think about the future of social values, this is what does the future hold for social values research? And I think in an age of AI where, there's tons of stuff happening, like where do you see a place for social values?
I think I'd said previously too that we're continuously sensing, value. We're always on the lookout. So even in the work that we do, working with the values that we have, we're always on the lookout. We view the world through values. We view all of our client work through values and those kinds of things. But in addition to that, we're always I think on the lookout to see like what is happening in the world. What are some of the things that are reflective of how people are thinking and feeling and reacting to things. So building out those values are important. And we do have additional values that are not part of our core set that we've kind of incorporated over the last 5 years that took into account, technology and the digital landscape, and now particularly with AI, where I think, so on the one hand, to answer your question, we're continuously trying to keep a pulse, and stay ahead and look out for values as they're evolving, to make sure that we're able to kind of track and add to our ability to bring people to life and understand the world. But I think also a number of the values that we recently added are actually kind of on the flip side of where AI and technology is taking us, right? We have a lot of kind of more humanistic values, and we have seen that there is, amongst a large portion of the population, a really strong emphasis being placed on, our humanity and just the human beings, right? And so that I think is going to become more and more important in terms of the role that social values can play, because it helps. It's kind of the flip side, the contrast of the I guess the double-edged sword that is technology.
Yeah. So we have some great questions here. Someone was saying, can you talk about how you play around with values? And I think that's a really interesting question. I think one of the ways that we play around with values is through kind of our values workshops that we do with clients, where it's actually not specific to kind of necessarily a brand or a product, but thinking more broadly about, a generation or a type of consumer segment, and actually brainstorming, ideating, using values as that backdrop. And I think one of the benefits that I've seen clients most kind of frequently articulate in terms of why they like values or why they use values is because it really gives them a moment to pause, to ask, like, why am I doing this? Like, who am I doing this for? Why am I doing this? Why is this going to resonate with the audience that I'm trying to capture? And I think some of the kind of and maybe you can speak to some of the activities that we do kind of in those workshops, but like finding ways to kind of connect, product use to values, or to, think about specific behaviors in relation to values, can really help to kind of bring people in to be thinking more critically about values and questioning their own values too. Like I find that when we go and speak to clients and we get them to do our social values quiz or whatever, it's a really interesting conversation because it's not something that we are regularly thinking or talking about, in our day-to-day.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many different ways that we play with values. So our social value survey or quiz is one of them. So, and that's a really fun way. It takes less than 5 minutes to do, and you find out what value segment you get put into. We have it done for every generation in Canada, so we can share that at some point. But it's also us playing with values in terms of exploring and finding, kind of trying to keep a pulse on what's happening and building new values, right? New values constructs. What are the questions that need to be asked that really kind of paint and tell the story about what that values is all about? That's really kind of playing with values too. The other way of playing with values is, again, like in the workshops that we're doing, where I find it's helping our clients play with values too, right? Because when our clients are able to kind of understand segments and then kind of painted brought to life and painted through values in addition to whatever is relevant to their market or business. But also some of the activities that we do, so empathy mapping or journey mapping or those kinds of things too. It's another way values helps, in addition to some of those other aspects of the thoughts and the feelings and the things that matter next. It helps our clients also be able to play with values.
There's another question. Are there any LGBTQ plus values that you recommend using to guide marketing message during Pride Month? I'm coming from a place of wanting to show stakeholders that the values are important to tourism marketing. That's a really great question. I'm really glad that you asked that, because I'm actually in the process of writing an article right now on values in the LGBTQ community. And I think one of the things that we need to remember, and that values is a good reminder of, is that the LGBTQ community isn't a monolith in terms of like how they think or the values that they hold, but there's actually value segments within the LGBTQ community. And like those values are influenced by the experiences that those individuals have. And so I would say that like there are definitely going to be segments, and keep an eye out on LinkedIn for that article to come out. But I think one of the things that you need to be thinking of is like what about the LGBTQ community are you trying to communicate in relation to kind of travel and tourism? What benefits or what experiences are you trying to kind of draw in? Because it's going to be a subsection of the LGBTQ community that's really going to resonate with. And so thank you. That was a great question. Another question was on how do you apply the values lens to a B2B context and communicating with people in a professional context? Another really great question. And I think I personally do this a lot because I work with doctors and nurses and other healthcare professionals a lot. And we've done segmentation specifically on healthcare professionals. And one of the ways that we do that is really to kind of get at not just like, what they're doing from like a prescribing perspective or whatever, but how do they think about the client, or the patient-doctor relationship? Like, how do they view their role in the context of their clinic? What role do they believe kind of doctors have to play? What drove them to become a doctor? Like all of these questions really kind of help to form, unique segments within this healthcare professional kind of area. We've also done this with like high value stakeholders. So companies who are trying to reach out to high value stakeholders to understand mindsets around like investments, for example. So advisors are people that we do a lot of work with. We look at the values that those advisors have as individuals. And I think that's really what's important, is that values are not looking at what they're doing as professionals only, but it's kind of like, who is the person behind that professional title, right? So you're an advisor, but you're a person first, and what's actually driving those decisions, or how you kind of operate, people who like, there's value kind of around order versus spontaneity, for example. People who are more spontaneous, they're going to work a bit differently, and they're going to be, engaging with different types of content and different initiatives in different ways. And we see that, I see that all the time here at Environics. We have a diverse set of values within our organization, and you see what people are kind of drawn to within a professional context. And I think depending on kind of who you're trying to reach from a B2B perspective, there are a lot of ways of kind of getting at like what's actually driving them, what does success look like to them, right? We look at, you can even look at like behaviors like, have they been at the company for 25 years or do they move every 2.5 years type thing? Like that tells you something about the values of an individual. So I think B2B is definitely like an area that I think people don't necessarily like assume or think about when it comes to values, but a really interesting area.
Yes. So we're all human beings, and we all.
Will social values data be available for academic use for graduate students? So we do have some social values data available online, and we'll be publishing more and more as kind of, I know we're coming up with a new website, so I'm going to plug that here. So there's definitely opportunity, and I encourage you to reach out to see how you might kind of get access to some of that information, because we have done a lot of work with academic institutions kind of in the past.
Yes, but we have a lot of articles on our website that touch on a number of different industry sectors and categories and perspectives. So please come visit and take a look.
Perfect. There's another question here. With the changing demographics in Canada, have you observed any new or emerging values that you're looking to capture? Oh, that's an interesting one. I think we've definitely seen changes, like as the population changes and as like more, with more immigrants that are kind of coming, we have an aging population as well. And so, that also is changing things. But
and so I think that's where sometimes the disconnect comes in, where people think, okay, well, why are we seeing these big shifts in the values that are being profiled about a specific group within the population, and they think it's because that individual's values are changing, and that's not true, right? Once our values, which are set earlier on in life, are formed, they don't fundamentally change. They may shift over time through a little education or some life experiences, but you don't become a very, very traditional person if you were generally always a very progressive person, and vice versa. So the changes that we see that take place in society in terms of values shifts are shaped by the population changes. So immigration brings with it a lot of different kind of cultural influences. As people are aging, and then we have the new alpha generation, and which we'll be spending some time unpacking as well. Then there's going to be some shifts and impacts in terms of how the values are going to be shifting over time.
Yeah, I think global consciousness is one that really kind of sticks out in my mind as like really changing, and that's a result not just of population changes, but also just a broader awareness and an availability of information from kind of global perspectives.
Which has been greatly enhanced by technology, right? We have everything's at our fingertips now. We can experience virtually anyways life that's taking place all around the world without having to be there.
Can you comment on how social values can be applied to community safety or personal safety decisions? How do we as a fire service, this is interesting. How do we as a fire service better engage a message to a community to encourage individuals to take care of their own fire safety?
So this reminds me of some work that we conducted, not related to fire, but in the electrical space, so the electrical safety space, where values are a big driver of whether or not people will be receptive to certain messages about safety. There are different groups, so some are going to be, even advocates and supporters of safety, and influencers in that space. But you are still always going to have probably a group that is, just very highly risk-taking, very rejecting of any kind of, authority or those kinds of things. And those values will be a little bit, the people who hold those values will be a little bit tougher to sway, but it really does start with understanding the values of the population or the target audience out there, and kind of seeing where they fall out, so that way you can adjust the messaging overall in a way that will speak to them. So someone who has, kind of a high risk taking type of stance or mindset is going to need a different type of message. It makes me think back to the seatbelt. It's probably earlier than your time, but anyways, seatbelts campaigns where it kind of showed very horribly detrimental and highly violent outcomes if you don't wear your seatbelt, had influence on a certain group of people because of what the imagery and the messaging that came across, versus another type of message about putting on your seatbelt because it's the good thing to do and ensure your safety and security from that perspective is a different kind of message that resonates with a different kind of group.
Okay, this last one here that I have is social values are the greatest. It allows us to share patient stories in a tone that resonates better, resulting in improved response rates. And I'm going to speak to this kind of briefly, but we've used values to kind of help with better patient engagement within like patient programs, for example. So understanding like kind of how people think about their health and what supports they need in relation to their values. So do they believe that they have a high efficacy kind of on their own, their ability to kind of drive personal kind of change, versus does it need to come from a physician? Like who needs to kind of be that influence? And also, what are they thinking about? Are they thinking about like 10 years into the future? And do we want that kind of future focused message? Or do we want something that's more kind of like tangible in that like some people are just thinking about getting through kind of tomorrow or the next week, and there's that more survival kind of mindset versus that kind of overall fulfillment mindset. And I think we see differences in the way that patients resonate with messages, but also how they engage with different programs, patient programs, that kind of thing. So I think that's a really great question, and definitely an area that we've done a lot of work in. So I guess we're going to kind of wrap this up. I really appreciate everyone who's able to join today. This is our first of what we hope to be a kind of a series. And in the next kind of few, we're going to cover off like how do we actually collect. So for collect the data, what type of analysis are we doing? We're going to bring in our chief scientist, Dave Jameson, to talk about that. And that's, for people who are more on the technical side or more interested in kind of what's under the hood. But then we'll also be doing stuff around specific industries. So how to use social values within healthcare, financial services, retail,
yes.
And then also, different ways and thinking about like generation, the millennial generation, Gen Z, that kind of thing. So yes. We'll be doing some more specific topics.
Scan the QR code. I don't know where it's appearing, but please scan and connect.
And connect with us, follow us on LinkedIn, and then we look forward to our next session. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.